Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now you might expect AMD EPYC processors to require super expensive server motherboards, but this one is socket AM5. It's called the 4124P and with a launch price of $149, it sits alongside the cheaper Ryzen 7000 series CPUs in terms of cost. I bought this one out of curiosity and actually finding it was no easy task. I ended up paying about £150 and for that I could have definitely got a 7500F or 7600 and saved a bit of cash. Although not listed on any of the motherboard support pages I looked at, this worked straight out of the box with an Asus Prime X670E board. I like to think it would work on lower cost B650 or A620 boards as well, but until I get the chance to confirm this I won't make any confident assumptions. EPYC processors are more intended for data centers or server systems, but this isn't random data center and servers in HD, so we'll be focusing mainly on gaming performance today. First, the specs. The 4124P has 4 cores and 8 threads with a base clock of 3.8 GHz and a boost clock of over 5. In fact, it hit at least 5 GHz during all of my gameplay tests today, not to mention it beat the i3-14100F in the Cinebench R23 runs. I believe this might just be, at the time of recording, the new fastest quad-core CPU on the market. This thing also has integrated graphics, which we'll touch on later, but first let's talk about gaming with a discrete GPU, namely the RTX 4060. I've used this to start with because it's probably as high as I'd go in terms of a pairing at 1080p. There are also some scenarios whereby we notice the processor becoming the bottleneck or the more limiting part of this CPU and GPU combo. Overall though, this was a pretty well matched configuration. I also stuck 32 gigs of 6400MHz dual channel desktop RAM in here, which worked faultlessly after enabling the XMP mode in the BIOS. Most of the time the EPYC 4124P sat at 5.15 GHz during gaming tests and peaked at 90 watts. Most of the time it hovered around 85. Cyberpunk 2077 is our first result. At 1080p high, we saw 87 FPS on average, with percentile lows of 63 and 54 respectively. CPU utilisation peaked at around 90%, but even so, and in NPC heavy areas the performance remained consistent, which is quite surprising for a quad-core processor. I expected far more slowdown. We did see the CPU hit 100% usage in Stalker 2, and this did have an impact on our frame times. This is one of the reasons I wouldn't recommend any higher than a 4060 or equivalent as a GPU pairing, because it'll just be wasted power. If the CPU has no more to give, we simply won't benefit from a better graphics card. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle up next, and I'm really enjoying this one, to be honest. It gobbles up pretty much all of the 4060's VRAM, but surprisingly runs quite well at medium. Again, the limitations of a quad-core can be seen with the percentile numbers, but it's a solid effort overall. Flight Simulator 2024 looked to be more GPU intensive at first until I looked down at the ground or switched to the cockpit view, and our CPU utilisation shot up, and the frame rates, well, they just fell out of the sky, I think would be a suitable analogy given the game. Red Dead Redemption 2 next, and this is more GPU intensive even with the 4-core 4124P in the machine. These 4 strong cores are holding up well here as reflected by the 1 and 0.1% figures. The penultimate test, Counter-Strike 2, ran really well at high settings, and this pairing would even be suitable for those with higher refresh rate 144 or 240Hz displays. I should also mention at this point, before I forget, that the EPYC 4124P did not come with a cooler, so I'm using a cheap Thermalright Assassin King 120 SE. It seems to be absolutely fine for this relatively low power chip. Finally, for the initial DGPU tests, we have Fortnite, which was running at medium with Nanite enabled. We also have 100% rescaling, and we saw an average of 96. As you can see from the overlay, there are moments whereby the CPU hits 95 to 100% utilization, but this doesn't impact the frame times too much, at least not as much as I was expecting. The EPYC 4124p also has integrated graphics, which I touched on earlier. They are just called Radeon graphics according to GPU-Z and clock up to 2200 MHz. These integrated graphics aren't very good for gaming, but they can still manage esports titles such as CS2 and Fortnite with reduced resolution and graphical options. This iGPU is instrumental for the intended use though. It's more than enough for daily driving an office machine. Fortnite fared a little better. We hit 115 FPS on average with 70% scaling and performance mode. Again, the percentile lows left a little to be desired, but it's way better than nothing. If you work in an office with one of these CPUs in your PC, and those spreadsheets have got a little too tedious, you can fire up Fortnite and still have a semi-decent experience. Now, to be honest, you'll be better off with a 7500F or 7600, and you could probably find either of those for less than the cost of one of these, especially if shopping through AliExpress, for example. That was always going to be the conclusion really, but if you do happen to find one of these really cheap, and you're wondering if it can be used for gaming purposes, then hopefully I've helped answer that question. Furthermore, as far as quad-core processors go, it's probably the best there is, but I'll purchase another 14100F for a few comparisons later this week. It's cool that this thing exists and that it's socket AM5 because it's more accessible to a wider audience if you can find one, and having said that, it is potentially completely redundant as a choice for gamers, but I've definitely had fun testing it out. I also quickly wanted to mention gaming performance with a more powerful card at say 1440p. To do this, I put the 4070 Super in the system just to see how it would fare, and we saw the same sort of limitations in more CPU intensive areas across the few games that I did test, so there will still be a few dips and drops here and there, but I was also surprised to see the 4070 Super hitting 100% utilization or close to it in a lot of areas too, meaning that this isn't holding it back well as much as I anticipated. It's not a terrible choice if you're playing at higher resolutions, or a terrible pairing I should say, because it's probably not the wisest choice in the world, but these two do work better than I thought together. You may also be interested to know that the GPU is running in full PCIe X16 mode, and this is something I wanted to test because I know some 8000 series APUs limit the PCIe lanes. For example, the 8700G, if you're using a discrete GPU, then that will run in PCIe X8 at most. I didn't think we'd see that sort of limitation with this, but it was definitely worth testing anyway, and 4070 Super is running at its maximum potential, aside from the whole CPU bottleneck thing, but yeah, we'll have a few comparisons coming soon. I'd also like to try and overclock this thing if I can with a better cooler. Hopefully you can join me for those videos very soon, but for this one, thank you very much for watching. Please be sure to leave your thoughts down below in the comments. As always, would you buy one of these? If you're a gamer, I probably already know the answer. Honestly, the 7500F is going to be the better choice. It's got more cores and more threads, but as I said, I found this pretty interesting to check out, and I hope you did too. If you can pick one up really cheap, like all of a sudden you just see one for like £80 or dollars or whatever, then it's probably worth a buy, even to just play around with or use in a really entry-level system with an upgrade path, I should add too. But buying new, if you can find one, probably not worth it at its launch price, unless you are using it for its intended server or workstation use, of course. But thanks again, and I'll see you next time.